Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Successful Separations, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Deb Beto, and I will be your moderator today and be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. If you have audio difficulties or a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Please feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, and then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenter will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of webinars upcoming in 2020 covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we offer the mandatory Preventing Harassment training in English 3 times a year. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Successful Separations. Today's interactive session will be facilitated by CJ Westrick. CJ Westrick is an SPHR and has been in human resources management for over 25 years and worked with companies with 25 to 1,750 employees nationwide. CJ received her SPHR, which is Senior Professional in Human Resources, her national certification in 2002, and has a bachelor's degree in business management. She started HR Jungle in 2006 and targets companies who want senior-level HR expertise on a part-time basis. HR Jungle provides business owners and management teams workable solutions and hands-on assistance with employees and legal compliance through outsourced HR services. With that, I will turn the presentation over to CJ.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Up bright and early, and I'm thankful you're willing to take time out of your day for this webinar. What we're going to be talking about today is to understand the employment relationships, how to identify the employment laws that might affect termination, to recognize the legitimate reasons for terminating employees, and how to prevent wrongful discharge and discrimination lawsuits. And we're going to just start right off with our first polling question.
All right, let me get that launched. Here we go. If you have an employment at will relationship with an employee, you have an absolute right to fire that employee at any time for any reason. Is this true or false? So CJ cannot see the polling questions here, so that's why I'm monitoring the polling questions, and I'm also monitoring the questions box. So if you have any questions throughout, please let us know and we'll try to work those questions into the presentation. And I want to make sure everybody's participating here because this is a participatory event to keep you on your toes. So if you wouldn't mind using your voting buttons to vote for your answers, then once we've got a good percentage of people voting, we will go ahead and read the responses. So CJ, at this point, 39% of the participants say true and 61% say false.
And okay, so if I move forward with that, I'm going to say the false people are correct because these days there's a lot of things that might contradict an at-will relationship. And you want it definitely in all of your materials, in your handbooks, things like that, because that needs to be out there. But keep in mind
CJ,
that,
you're Your microphone is cutting out more than it's cutting in.
Oh, is this, whoops, hold on. Does that sound better?
No.
Ooh. Okay. Hold
That
on a
does.
second.
Now it does.
Oh, really? So if I get
Great.
away further.
Okay, thank you. There you go. Thank you.
All right. So there's a lot of different things that can interfere with the at-will relationship, or at least make it a little bit more questionable. There's employment contracts. I've had clients that tell me, oh no, they don't, do an offer letter, they do an employment contract, and I'm always dreading to hear what they put in it, because it can be a lot, there can be a lot of things in there that will conflict with other things you've got written elsewhere. Most of the time, an employment contract is meant for the top executives, where there has been a very special deal worked out to get that CEO or C-level person into the company. But the employment at will it's a common law doctrine, which, we do say, that gives us the right to, terminate the relationship at any time for any reason. But you have to look at the other details you have out there. If you've got contracts or agreements that might say something else, or even an offer letter that you've not written the offer correctly in a way that it doesn't make it, so that it looks permanent, because in HR these days, we don't use the word permanent anymore, because people are taking that literally and not realizing a permanent full-time job doesn't mean for life. And so you don't want to use things like that, because that too can mess up that at-will concept. And so you want to kind of keep in mind what it looks like on a legal basis. Sometimes there's a psychological contract. I have seen, I've actually had like a VP promise something about the work to, a candidate that they're hiring, and it wasn't something that is normal for the company, and made the company have to jump through a lot of hoops in order to honor the VP's word. Because when someone at a higher level says something, it weighs a lot heavier in court than it does from some low-level person who doesn't have the power to make it happen. So there's expectations. People will come in and they'll take a job, and it's like, well, this is not what I was told it would be, stuff like that. But for the most part, I think you need to consider at will as kind of lip service. You want it on everything, but don't hold it up as the only reason you're going to fire somebody, because that never goes well. And I have seen people when they're not given an actual reason, because even without will, there's a reason you're terminating the person. And I have seen them come up with some pretty crazy things when they're filing for unemployment, because they don't know, so they make it up as they go along. And a lot of them think unemployment is hard to get, so they really go crazy sometimes with what they say, and it wasn't anything like what happened. So, you rely on at will, but don't lean too heavily on it as your protection. Next polling question.
All right. Our next polling question. 2 federal laws that impose limits on termination are the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. Is that true or false? We've got a few people that are getting used to the polling questions with their answers right off the bat. We're going to wait here for a couple of other questions. And thank you for adjusting your microphone, CJ. It sounds much better, and I apologize that I had to interrupt there.
No, I'd rather people can actually hear me.
Okay, so we have 85% of the people say true, and 15% are saying false.
That one is true. There's a lot of different legal limitations on terminations. Everything from the 2 that were just mentioned, the NLRB gets into the act sometimes, OSHA. There's a lot of different things that can make it harder for you to terminate, or at least where you must be more careful. I think the disabilities one is probably the one that's scariest, because it's harder to determine when someone has a disability, because that bar gets lowered all the time on what legally they're considering kind of a lifelong disability of sorts. So it makes it more challenging for all of us that are having to deal with this kind of thing to take a look at that. It's like something about throwing the kids back in school. It seems like everybody has been calling me with all these issues they're having with employees. And some of it is problematic because they didn't deal with it soon enough. And I just had one where this person had a lot of attendance issues. And then the last like week and a half just kind of disappeared off the screen. But when I talked to her, it turns out she's pregnant. And I'm in California, and California offers up a lot of protections for pregnancy. So they kind of missed their chance to do a termination based on attendance, because now, you know, she's got a reason for it and has some protections that we have to work our way around. So you need to kind of be aware of where, for your company, call it the soft spots are of where there might be issues, and to make sure that managers understand that, because a lot of times managers have hiring and firing power, and you want to be very careful that they know what they're doing out there, or at least are coming to talk with you before they take actions. And moving right on to the next polling question.
Okay. Before terminating an employee for poor performance, try other possibilities such as, and select one of these answers: verbal counseling, training, written warnings, or all of the above. So we're getting already about 50% of the people have voted, so that's awesome. And everybody's voting. 99% are saying all of the above, and 1% say training.
And well, it is all of the above, which obviously includes the training. And you know, I've had so many clients, because I work with some smaller clients sometimes, and I've had them literally afraid to fire because they don't know what they should have done, or they'll say, you know, they've got this whole pile of things that's going wrong with this employee, and yet they have never put anything in writing. And so now they think, oh, I can't terminate because I don't have it in writing. Ideally, you do kind of go through some of this stuff. The verbal counseling is usually going to be the #1 thing, but I'm not someone who's overly patient to where I'm not going to counsel the person 3 different times on the same subject without now putting it into writing for them. But I know I work with a lot of people who do not like or know how to even put it in writing. And so the training kind of goes 2 ways. One is, have you tried doing a little retraining with the employee? But the other side of it is, have you tried doing some training with your managers so they know what you would like to see in writing? And, you know, my biggest thing is, it doesn't have to be this huge, you know, essay. They just need to keep notes of, okay, I talked to Sam today about this particular issue, and, you know, have a date on it so you know, and then later you can come back and say, all right, you know, I talked to Sam on October 15th, and now it's, you know, November 2nd, and I'm having to go back through it again, because that builds a trail for you that makes the terminations much easier. And so when we look at different things like poor performance, you know, you can document for that. Unfortunately, they also can get unemployment for poor performance. It's not one of those things that will block them from getting it. So it doesn't exactly give some employees the push to try and do better. But you want to kind of try and see, and at least for yourself, to know that you've tried the things that you can, and to document those. If you are putting people through some retraining, make sure that's documented. If you've had the conversations, I usually, you know, will at most have like usually 1 conversation. I might, you know, just write it up for myself that I've had to do something extra. If I'm, you know, it's like I said, I don't have a lot of patience, so I'm going to speed that up a bit. If I'm going back in the 3rd time, I'm still having similar issues, I'm going to document it in a way that the employee now has to sign off on it, because I want him to take it seriously, because I'm taking it seriously. And I really hate to see when someone gets fired, and I can tell if I'm there how clueless they are, that they didn't even know this was a possibility for them. And that's really what you want to avoid, because that's what really turns what could be a successful separation into something not so great. And because it'll make the employee upset or mad. And when they're mad, it's never a good thing for the company. When you've got something like insubordination, in California, I've actually had EDD, which is our Employment Development Division here, tell me that insubordination, there's a difference. If someone comes into your office and is yelling at you, they consider that to be the employee voicing their opinion. However, if that employee does the same thing out in front of other employees, it now becomes insubordination. And in California, that is a reason to terminate, and they wouldn't get unemployment for it. So you have to kind of understand what your state laws might be toward different things, where your windows are as far as what would or wouldn't qualify for unemployment, because I know a lot of companies tend to not want to have to deal with unemployment, but sometimes it's the least of your concerns when there's big issues going on. But you know, you have to, when you're talking about insubordination as a reason for termination, look through everything that's going on carefully. You know, did the employee actually understand what was expected? Are they just now frustrated and that's why they're being insubordinate? Or is the manager particularly sensitive in a way that anybody talks back to them in any way, they're going to see it as insubordination? Not everybody expects nor needs to just say, you know, salute and say, yes, sir. It's not the way most companies are built anymore. So you have to kind of look at it and see what it is. Is this a manager who gets this kind of complaint frequently? And again, document. The poor attendance and tardiness. I know just in general in California, this seems to be a bigger and bigger issue all the time. And, you know, a lot of them don't. It's, you know, in the old days, shall we say, where you had the time clock and everybody was waiting by the time clock to hurry and punch in and start their work. And now the information I get is, all right, you know, they kind of show up when they want to show up sometime in this window. I know a lot of my clients are developing these flex policies to where it's like, okay, we need you here by 9 o'clock, but we don't care if you come anywhere in the window of 7 to 9 and then just work your 8 hours. So they have made sure that they can have some flexibility there. Not all positions have that flexibility. If you've got someone who's opening the business or in the front desk where you need them there right on time, you need to make that very clear. And then when, you know, they don't show up and, you know, it's because there's a difference between the tardiness and the attendance. A lot of the sick leave policies that are being developed in a lot of different states, California's got a ton of them. There's like, last count, 32 localities in California with their own sick leave policy. But the basic, even the state policies, it's kind of like it's not something where we can require employees to call in ahead of time if they're sick. You know, it's more like a discovery thing because of the way the law was written. And so you have to be able to recognize some of that and realize it may not be an immediate termination. I have been told by attorneys in California, because of the way our sick law is written, that someone could be a no-show, no-call for 3 days, and you fire them, and they come in on day 4 with a doctor's note, you're going to have to rehire them, because that's the way our law is written. So look very carefully at your law and how it's written, because usually where it's not so much it's written that says you have to do that, it's the missing pieces that force you to do that. So it's reading between the lines, talking to attorneys to figure out how it's being interpreted by the courts, and to look at those things, because it can get pretty messy out there with all the different little laws we've got floating around now, and to know what works in there, because there is a difference between the excused and the unexcused absences. The sick leave is going to be an excused absence because it's legally required in your state potentially. Unexcused is when, you know, I've had, oh, I'm going to, you know, I want a vacation day on Friday and they're sorry, you know, we're really busy. You can't take the time off, and the employee takes it off anyhow. That's an unexcused absence. So, you know, look and see what the interpretation is for where you are and where your business is, and just apply everything fairly. Another polling question.
All right, so I'm going to launch this. Provided the company can prove the employee had excessive absences and tardiness, the employee has no legal recourse against the company. Is that true or false? And CG, while the participants are answering the polling question, we had a question that comes in that when it comes to documentation, are there any suggested templated forms or best practices for the content?
There aren't any templates that I've seen. I mean, I give my clients some really basic information because you want it, you know, it's like if worst case scenario, because I personally prefer like a short memo that just says, you know, I had a conversation with this person, because I'll do that when I'm reiterating, what I call my reiteration. We've had the talk, and now I'm going to go back and write up what I believe we agreed to and send it to the employee. And or if you, I've had some managers who balk at that because they don't want to have to do their writing. So the other side of it is have your employee go back and send you an email saying what they think happened and what they're supposed to be doing, because that's a better way of making sure you know the employee understood or didn't understand what just went on. But I think it's mostly just something that's legible. You always want a date, you always want a signature by the person who wrote it up, so that, you know, it can be gathered up to later, but it can be pretty simple overall. And if need be, you know, there's forms out there you can get for disciplinary actions, or you can create your own where, like, here's the most common things that someone might be, you know, written up for or talked about. And, you know, and you just more check a box and put in a couple of notes, and then it gets filed.
Okay. In terms of our polling question, we have 32% say true and 68% say false.
Well, this is false because there's so many reasons they might be late or tardy or not be able to come in that day, and there's a lot of protections out there. You know, there's FMLA potential, because usually if they're out for a couple of days and you haven't heard from them, you need to, you know, and you've got more than 50 employees, so that you're subject to FMLA, you're going to want to contact them and find out what's going on to see if it's something that the FMLA, I can't even talk, FMLA protections. You know, Title VII, there's a disabilities thing, there's workers' comp stuff. This, like, as I mentioned before, the paid sick leaves. And so there's different reasons why someone might be, so you can't just, they're out. I'm in San Diego, and we have a sick leave law just for the city of San Diego that gives employees 40 hours a year. That's a lot of time. I mean, most of my clients about had a heart that got put into play. And so, but it's one of those that's badly written to where, you know, there's things like we can't require a doctor's note until they've been out for 3 consecutive days. So it's like we're kind of on a holding pattern half the time, waiting to see what we know. I just had another client with someone who was out for a few days. When I finally got in touch with him to see what was going on, oh, my back was been hurting, and usually a couple days does that. And I'm like, well, you need, you know, to let us know. You need to call these things. But employees do things based on what they believe is the right thing, or they just plain won't think about the company at the time they might be hurting or having an issue. So you need to kind of look through it and dig through to find out why. I mean, if it's excessive absences and they're constantly tardy, I mean, yeah, it's, you know, it is a reason to definitely move toward termination, but you want to find out if there's a problem. You know, you could have a woman who's constantly late and it turns out she's pregnant and has morning sickness. Or, you know, something like that. I had somebody years ago that suffered with a lot of migraines. And so she told me that, you know, a lot of times she'll have to get up in the morning, and if she's got a migraine, take a pill that knocks her out for a couple hours, and then she can come into work. But we didn't know that until we started asking questions and to figure out, and then you have to figure out, is it under one of, or are they not caring about your, just jump, at least investigate it. I mean, it's definitely a flag that you want to follow up on, but it's not something that you should just immediately jump to termination without having more information. Company policy.
CJ, we're experiencing that sound issue again.
Oh, okay. Is this any better? Or,
yep.
That's so weird. I have to not get too close to my microphone. Okay. Violations of company policy. So, you know, hopefully, depending on your size, you've got an employee handbook that has what your codes of conduct are, stuff like that. It has information about the abusive conduct and bullying. You've got a dress code in there. You've got the full harassment, all this kind of stuff. So as a company, first, you have to decide, do you have a zero tolerance policy? I see this most often come up with your alcohol and drug policies, because I'll see handbooks that say we have a zero tolerance for this. And yet, when I talk with them, I find out they're doing company parties for the holidays that they have booze there. So that's not a zero tolerance. So you want to make sure that you're not violating your own company policies for starters, but to take a look at stuff and make sure that there are rules that people can follow and that everyone is following. Because as soon as you have some people breaking out and they get away with it, then others will follow suit and use them as the precedent for not being able to be judged by it, or that it's not a violation because everybody does this. So you want to look at that. Dress code, it's becoming more of an, also more protections with dress code and the way it's being handled. In California, we have a new policy about hairstyles that are now being protected, so that if they're historically a hairstyle worn by certain races, they are protected. But also religion has been out there for quite a while now. So there's a lot of different religious dress, or we'll call it ornamentation on the body, that someone might follow based on their religion. And so look at this kind of stuff. With harassment, abusive conduct, stuff like that, ideally your policy is a lower level. It's got a lower bar on it for violation than the law has. Because you don't want the first time somebody breaks your policy that it's also a legal claim. You want to catch it before it hits that legal claim. So you really want to take a look at it and understand where those bars are. Make sure that your managers understand where those bars are. My experience has been, if you have 5 different managers, you probably have 5 different levels of tolerance. And so you need to make sure they understand what the company's level of tolerance is, not their personal tolerance, but what the company will and won't allow. And make sure that they're dealing with that accordingly. Because I've just seen too many variations, and as soon as you've got variations in how you're handling something, then there's excuses on why that person now can't be terminated or even disciplined. So you really want to kind of take a look at it and see where you fit in all of that. And make sure, I don't know if you're doing onboarding with employees. There's different levels of onboarding, obviously, but make sure you're doing something that walks through at least some of the policies in your handbook, or just the company policies if you don't have a handbook, because that's where it goes awry on you. It's like, okay, wait, it says this over here, but you're doing this over here. So if you've got anything in writing, it should match up with what the actual practice is, because nobody wants to be fired for something they didn't even know about. And that's where your job comes in and the manager's job comes in, to make sure that the employee understands what those policies are and how they're being handled and where your tolerance is. So I know a lot of people do a very quick and short onboarding process, to where it's kind of like, fill out this paperwork, go sit over there. But it's not doing the company or the employee any favor when you do that, because I've seen a lot of employees terminated that didn't even understand that was a policy that they were violating. And so you need to, communicate clearly. And it's not just on your policies, also for a manager, they should be able to communicate their expectations, what behavior they want from the people reporting directly to them. Because as I said, you have 5 managers, you're going to have 5 different levels of expectations and stuff like that. It's really hard for people to understand, and they're working off of what they did at a previous company half the time. So you really do need to make it for them to do a good job, because that's probably the biggest thing when you're looking for successful separations. Part of that's going to be on how successfully you got the person on board and manage them along the way. Because I have seen some people were fired, and they've actually said, it's like, all right, I knew this was coming, I just wasn't sure when. They knew things were going bad for them. And that's actually what I love to see, because then they're already making plans on their own. It's like, if they know it's going wrong, they are hopefully smart enough to see the writing on the wall, but they shouldn't have to read the invisible writing. It should be told to them. Make sure they understand things are not going well. And that, again, goes to manager training and documenting things, to where they've been told. I have found the employees will take something in writing way more seriously than they will anything verbalized. And so there's 2 parts to that. One is to look and I mean, I know as HR, I've had to warn both when I was inside a company, I would have worn a manager or a VP, and I've seen it as a consultant, is that if you want me in the room when you have the discussion, realize you just ratcheted up the level of anxiety to a very, very high level. And so what I also find is when I'm in the room, they're not listening anymore. They go into defense mode. It's almost like physically their ears closed up, and now they're just like freaking out, trying to figure out what they should be saying or doing. They're not paying attention anymore. So how you communicate these things makes a big difference. And I do find that because I believe people's ears can actually close up on you, putting it in writing gives them a second way to understand what you're trying to give them and to tell them and to correct, so that it stops. And because that should be your number one goal, that you're stopping the bad stuff before it gets to termination. But if you can't, then termination is the ultimate outcome of this. But to take a look at that and see, are they, do you feel that they're actually hearing what you're saying? And, again, document it. I document a lot of times, not only for the file, but also to ensure that the employee really gets the information I was trying to impart. I don't want them to say, oh, you never said that. And it's like, it was clearly what the whole meeting was about. So when you put it in writing, you can document something a little bit nicer that is something you can give to them, or you can just make your own notes and then give them something that better explains what you just tried to get through to them. In the law, I've had more than one client that has called and said, okay, we had someone who missed work yesterday, but they're in work today. They're not saying anything. But on the other hand, the person who called us yesterday to tell us he wouldn't be to work turned out to be a bail bondman. And they're like, what do we do with this? He hasn't actually said anything. And it's, you need to kind of figure out where, again, you fit into, where the company fits into this. Was this illegal activity or potential, alleged illegal activity? Did it take place at work, outside of work? Has the employee been convicted? I mean, convicted, by the time someone's convicted, you kind of know things have been going on. But is the crime related to the job? Are they embezzling from the company? Things like that. I had someone who actually, it was the company where we got the call from the bail bondman saying the guy wouldn't be at work. Well, the guy comes back to work, doesn't say anything to anybody, including his manager, never says a word about it. Then we get a call, or from ICE, and it's basically what it came down to. I'm in San Diego, so they believed that this guy had driven on his own time a truck into Mexico and was transporting illegal property. And so they were kind of tracking it around. We talked to an attorney who was able to go in and see what the claims were. But there is a big difference between being, charged with something and being convicted of it. Being charged in most cases is not going to be enough to terminate the person, unless what they're being charged with is something that is part of their work. But, embezzlement is certainly a reason to do that, but you also need to be very careful. It's sometimes very hard to prove it. I had an embezzlement case a few years back that was so easy. It was really almost embarrassing that the person chose this route, because they did it through payroll. And I had been brought in just to look over all it. The owner didn't know the embezzlement was going on. And it was kind of strangely funny, because it was right toward the end of the year. He wanted me to take a look of everything. They were coming away from having their HR done by their payroll company and stuff like that. And I go to look into the payroll reports, and I'm seeing, for an office manager, she's getting these huge bonus/commissions every pay period. And when I talked to the owner, it's like, oh, no, that position doesn't get anything like that. Well, she was actually, because she was processing payroll, she would put in $5,000 to $6,000 net as a bonus for herself every payroll period. It took me the longest time to get the owner to believe this had been happening, because everybody loved. And but she ended up pulling out $98,000 in that year. And and so yeah, termination. But you have to kind of look and, okay, if this was something, maybe they were doing bookkeeping on the side and it wasn't to the company and they get convicted, it's not something necessarily that means you are going to be able to terminate based on what happened on their personal time. So take a look at what the pieces of the puzzle are. The one I feel like I just lost a slide there. I might have moved it. Let's go ahead and do this polling question.
All right. So lying about required credentials or work experience on a job application would probably be considered adequate grounds for termination. Is that true or false? And I just have a couple of questions while they're answering, CJ. On the last question, we talked about the template form, and
Yes.
you did a great job of describing that. We had a follow-up question. Does that need to be an official signature, or would a reply from their email suffice?
A reply from the email would suffice, because in theory they're
Okay.
having a password, on their emails that shows it came from them.
Okay, and are you allowed to ask personal questions to find out why an employee is always late, or is that a violation of privacy?
No, you don't. Well, it's how you ask. I noticed,
Okay.
Sam, that you come in like 15 minutes late, sometimes 30 minutes late, almost every single day. What's going on? Just leave it as a wide open question and let them come up with something. If they introduce then something more personal, you can maybe ask a few more questions. But in the end, what you have to remember is you don't care why, you just want them there on time. And, so it's like I've had people say, oh, my car had troubles. And it's like, okay, so that means you just need to get up earlier so you can catch that bus. And so you don't really have to go that deep into personal, but, kind of have them focus on what you need, and you're trying to figure out why that's not happening.
Okay. As for the polling question, we have 80% say true and 20% say false.
Well, timing is everything. Most of the time, yes. If I find out somebody has lied to get the job, I'm going to probably terminate, because if they're going to lie to get it, then what are they going to do once they have the job? But you need, on something that goes with that question in particular, credentials. I mean, if I've had this happen before, if I'm doing background checks for a company and I just do the background checks, I mean, yes, in California, background checks have gotten a little messier than they used to be. But let's say you do background checks, and I'm always going to do a degree verification. If they put it on their application that they have a degree, I'm going to verify it, because I have had some very strange things go on. The saddest one was somebody who'd been got his degree, he was all proud and he had this and stuff, but it turned out he ripped off, and it was from a degree mill, but it wasn't from an accredited school. And he was so upset. And, but I think, you want to check, because I really, when the position didn't require a degree, and yet they list one. Because, degrees are one of the things that's hardest for you to check individually. You have to go through a background risk to get to them, because the schools aren't letting normal people like us ask. So, but if they needed it, I'd look for that dishonesty. When hired, had somebody I'd hired years ago, I was working in the pharmaceutical market or in the industry, and someone came in as a sales rep, and she put this beauty on thing that she'd worked out for a while on her day. And it was 3 months later when there was this, it was just a fluke that we were having a combined sales meeting or training with another pharmaceutical company where she had actually worked. And some people came up and talked to our people about her. And so I went back to her and said, what's going on here? And it's like, oh, well, I was only there 3 months and I didn't think it was relevant. And it's like, but you thought that the beauty salon was not another pharmaceutical company. That's just huge.
CJ, you're breaking up again. We didn't hear most of the story.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll waste your time with it. But bottom line is, it was like my, that's so weird. It went into mute on me. But bottom line is, if I think something wrong on an application, I'm going to do something, and I'm going to ask about it and look at it, because the honesty is questionable. But I've also, if you found out 6 months later, because you hadn't bothered to do reference checking or anything, and you suddenly decide this person lied. And I have seen in that case where, you know what, they've been working for you just fine for 6 months. At this point, that application no longer is relevant, and you can't use it against them because you didn't bother to check. So it wasn't that important to you that it was correct. So it can be grounds for, lying grounds for it, but you look for other things of dishonesty, because I do get business owners that are very worried when they find that someone has lied, because you just have to wonder then, where does it stop and where did it begin? And you don't want that in your workplace. And I think this is our last polling question.
Okay, and TJ, you're still not, still going in and out quite a bit. Okay, so employees who come to work under the influence of drugs or alcohol are protected under the ADA and cannot be terminated. Is that true or false? And we've got a good group of participants today. A lot of people are participating in the polling questions. We really appreciate that. And in this one, 7% are saying true and 93% are saying false.
And it is false. And they're not protected under the American Disabilities Act. And, because drugs and alcohol, there's, different things they can do for treatments and whatnot. But at this point, they're not protected. So you can terminate for that. In California, if you have more than 25 employees, if they come to you and say, I know I have a problem with alcohol, I want to go through treatment, you have to allow that and kind of hold their position. But they only get one time at that. After that, it's, gloves off, and they get terminated if they come in again where you have the influence. And I think the drugs are becoming more of an issue because of so many states having recreational marijuana. But as long as it's still a federal illegal drug, you can still say you can't be stoned while working. And I had one client where the person said, oh, I'm not stoned while I'm working. I do my last, smoke right before work. So he felt that he wasn't therefore under the influence while working. And it gets kind of crazy sometimes when you look at that. But you want to give some thought to what's coming up with this, with threats to the workplace. I have seen people who went over the deep end and we weren't sure what was wrong, but usually it's like if you've got people acting strangely, you want to get to the bottom of it and find out what the problem is. Sometimes it might be drugs or alcohol, sometimes it might be something else, but to take a look at that. You can't fire somebody when they're seeking help for the addiction. If they're filing a complaint about safety issues or cooperating with OSHA inspectors, you might not like it, but you're going to be in bigger trouble if you fire the person because they've made that, because that falls under like public health. You can't fire them for refusing to do a dangerous, job or task that puts safety at risk, puts themselves or others. You kind of want to know what, based on your organization and what the policies are there, of what is possible and not. When we look at options, layoffs, reductions in force, that's what the RIF is, needs to have a business reason. I get a lot of clients who want to lay off someone when I find out really they're just trying to terminate them. My thing is, I always say that, to me, a layoff means something's going wrong with the company. You can't keep them on the payroll right now, but back into a better mode, hire this person back. That's what I believe a layoff really means. It's not just, we hate you, we want you gone forever. And so don't fall back on that. And if you aren't really doing a true layoff, and to kind of look at the legal stuff. I think it's 60 or more employees. The WARN Act kicks in, but to look and see, are there notifications you need to give? Are there things that, employees might be entitled to? Obviously, vacation or PTO, whatever you're using there is paid out if you're letting anyone go for any reason. But then you also have a problem of the survivors. The people in the company who didn't get laid off, if it's a big layoff, you can have almost more of them leaving than you laid off because they are waiting for that other shoe to drop. So if you're doing a layoff, plan it out very carefully. A layoff, you're going to be one person. You're safer legally if it's more than one person. I've had I was in a company where we had about 115. We had a call. We'd been purchased about a year before and acquired, and we were kind of left on our own. But the acquiring company gave us one morning. And by the end of the day, I had laid off 50 people. Now we are on this really, really tight budget. But it was very painful going through each to be appropriate. Which one had knowledge that we would still need, because you have to with it. You should be able to explain to them how they got chosen for a layoff, for them not to be resentful. I mean, they're going to be resentful anyhow, but at least for it to go better. You want to make sure that it's not only the older people that got laid off, or and basically replaced by young people. So when you're doing these kinds of operations, look to see both what legally is required. Because I've seen a lot of times where if it's a large enough layoff, you want to have a whole sign on as to what you looked at, what were the different factors, how did this person fit it? And because we did one, when we did that one, actually 50 people, we let go of the newer product manager and kept the guy that was the manager of the department, because he had been doing it longer and this new person had only been in it for 3 months. And so, but she was very upset about it all. And so you really have to be able to explain it and understand what you're doing as part of the layoff. Some companies will actually provide outsourced help for them, for the employee to help find other work, or at least buff up their resume, stuff like that. So kind of walk into it with a lot of knowledge so that you can help your company do it well. Before a termination, you want to consider a lot of different things. Do they have, are you an Outwell company, or do they have something in writing that might counter that Outwell? And that you at least have to worry about and see whether or not this applies. How long have they been employed with you? Often, it's, what do they call it, last in, first out type of thing. So the newest hired people are the most likely to be terminated if you're having different problems and need just to reduce a department size or something. How long have they been in that type of work? Are they in a protected class? Look and see what your state and federal law is protecting as far as classes. And is it going to just be by coincidence that, oh, only women that go, or people over 40 or something like that? So you want to kind of really look closely at it and kind of look at it with a cynical eye. What is that going on? Is it a violation of public policy, which goes into those safety things and where there's protections there against the termination? Is there a co-employer relationship? This I often see with staffing agencies that are providing temps for you, or in a PEO, professional employer relationship. Well, let's see, PEO is a professional employer organization that will come in often, and they almost the employees on their payroll, but they do it all and it's kind of under one big roof, but you're considered co-employers because you're the ones managing them day to day. Is there something like that that could cause an issue in here? Take a look at it. Are you obligated to provide any notices under the WARN Act? So take a look at all those things and give yourself some other questions that you ask. Are you replacing this job? Are you saying it's an elimination of the position and then you're going to turn around and just replace the person and have the same position? That's really dangerous when you do something like that, because inevitably they're going to look for the reason they were kicked out of the job and someone else brought in. And given when you're looking for people, often it may be a younger person and maybe someone of the opposite sex or who knows what, but it's a real danger zone when you just are replacing the person, even though you're telling them you're eliminating the position. If I eliminate a position, I tell the client, I don't want to see anyone in that role for at least 6 months, because I want to show there's a huge gap of needing that position filled now versus later. Do you have history of complaints from the employee that could come back to bite you? And if they did complain in some way, was it responded to? How did it happen? Is there perception of a hostile work environment? And to me, this is the biggie here. Will this come as a surprise to the employee? A layoff, yeah, they're going to be surprised because that's usually a financial decision. But if they're being terminated for a reason that was their fault in some way, you know, attendance or poor performance and stuff like that, it should never be a surprise. There should have been discussions, because if that employee is surprised, it means it wasn't played out well. They weren't given the message that their job is at risk. Because I've actually asked managers, hardly anyone will ever say yes to this, but when let's go, well, I've had several conversations with them about their performance. And I say, did you ever say, if this doesn't change, you may lose your job? And they're like, well, no, I never came right out and said that. And it's like, but that's what you're thinking. So why aren't you saying it? Make sure that you understand the level of problem you're having with them and whatever the issue is. Otherwise, they're not going to put out the effort necessarily to fix it. You know, does a paper trail exist that is going to be detrimental to you or beneficial? I've had managers come to me and it's like, oh, you know, this person's just such a poor performer. And yet I can go into their file and see for years they have been getting those average reviews with nothing really negative in them. And it's like, this is fighting against you. When you're not honest in a performance review, it's going to come back to bite you, because that's your heads up for that employee. That's documentation. And you don't want it to work against you. You want it to work for you. So when you look at the paper trail overall, you're looking at different things that can come into play. Sometimes some companies are still doing performance reviews, but make sure that it's realistic. You know, this is your time to be able to say something honest about an improvement that's needed. I actually at one point took the performance review I was using, and instead of just saying, you know, pick 1 through 5 as your response to where the hell they're doing in it, I actually wrote in an explanation on each of the different categories we were asking them to rate. I would have a definition of what a 1 was, what a 2 looked like, what a 3 looked like, because I found that managers have a tendency to get weak, shall we say, or back away from those harder conversations. They know they're going to have that conversation with the employee, and yet they aren't, so they don't put anything real negative in there that they'd have to then talk about. But it needs to be there. So written records, you know, are you doing something in there that made notes that you've had these conversations at least? Did you ever do a written warning for the employee, telling them you've got your 1 chance left? I mean, and the written warning might be the very first thing that happens. Whoa, this was so big. I had a guy in a company where there was this huge refrigerator section out in the warehouse because they would get drugs in there or other kinds of materials that needed to be immediately refrigerated. We had an employee in the warehouse who forgot to put it in there, and we lost $15,000 worth of product. And he was given a written warning. You know, it's a one-time free, you know, get out of jail free card, that written warning. It's like, this is your absolute last chance. And it's going in there. So group involvement, you know, do you have other people you're talking about with this termination? You know, and do you have real grounds? I don't necessarily tell the employee every single thing that they're being fired for, but I want them to at least have something solid to work with. When you're looking at that, you've got, you know, everything from your just cause, you know, did you have something that you can actually say this employee did and back it up and prove it? Or, you know, and then did you handle it well? You know, is this employee being retaliated against in some way? In the HR side, you've really got to look through all these little pieces. You can't just say, oh yeah, you know, that would be a good reason, and let it drop right there. You're the, you know, the ones having to make sure that the company's not going to get in trouble from this employee saying something later, or going to a judge later saying, I don't think this is right. And you know, so you need to kind of look at all of that. Does it require a consultation with your attorney, your employment law attorney, to see, does it make sense to someone who's listening to it cleanly without that? Are you going to pay a severance? Do you have a separation agreement? A lot of times people want the separation agreements when you're firing someone, but keep in mind, an employee's not going to sign something unless there's something in it for them. That's why the severance and the separation agreement often go hand in hand. Otherwise, I don't bother with the separation agreement. It's like, is there something you're worried about that they're going to come back and file on? Then we have to look at how we're doing this in a whole different mindset. if this is just a poor performance thing and there's, been problems, you've got your documentation or you've got your notes, whatever, is there a bonus payout that's pending or due? How does that fit into the timing of your termination? If you're doing an annual bonus and it gets paid out at the end of January each year for the previous year, it's not gonna look good for you when you fire somebody in December and January, unless you've got a lot of backup for it, because it's gonna look like you're just trying to avoid that bonus. Outplacement assistant, do you have someone who, if you're layoffs, I see this most often, or position elimination, where you're wanting to help that employee find something new. So, at a minimum, it might help them just renew their resume and get some idea of what to be looking for. On a bigger price level, you can get handholding pretty much all the way through the process of them finding other work. So kind of look and see what all is going into this type of thing, and look at where your risks are. Has there been workplace violence? Is there security or IT issues coming up? Are you looking at what property they've got of yours? Sometimes you just have to write off that property because there's no good or easy way to get it back. Do you have confidentiality or proprietary information agreements and such? Like when you onboarded them, did they have to sign a non-disclosure agreement? Pull that out. I think it's always a good thing to give them a copy of that when they're leaving, to remind them that, they shouldn't be taking your classes. There's a lot of things you can't do to protect your stuff, but you can try. And what is the company response going to be if someone calls the company asking about that employee? Is someone going to give them a reference? Are you coming up with a standard statement that says, we don't do this, to where, sorry, we just don't give out references? But have something, because the people looking for those references can be sneaky and will round HR to get those answers, because they know HR is going to give it. So they're going to try and call the manager or someone else that may be with them. Look at the company reputation. One of the things that I think isn't thought of often is what the other is. A lot of times, if someone's been a poor performer and they ultimately get terminated, the employee understand that. I think the one hard for an employee to understand is when you have been limited on what you can say about the person. And so it's like the termination to the other employees was a complete surprise. Oh, he was such a nice guy. I think he did an okay job. In the world would they have fired him? Are they just going to point at me tomorrow and fire me? It's really hard to figure out what you legally can say, because you can't give out much information. And I'd say a lot of times you even want to work with the employee you just terminated as to what the message from both sides will be. What would you like us to say about, the departure and stuff like that, so they know what you're going to say and not worried about that. So overall, you want to think carefully when you're deciding to terminate. It really does pay to just run it past legal counsel to make sure there's not something you haven't thought about. Once a decision is made, move quickly. Employees have this second sense, it seems like, to know when things are going bad and they're going to get called in for that termination meeting. I don't know how many times I have had someone tell me, okay, we're planning to do it on Friday. And it's like, okay. And then on Monday I get the call. It's like, well, we didn't do it on Friday because Sam wasn't available. I mean, it's like a manager or somebody wanted in the meeting wasn't available. And so we were going to do it today instead, but now the employees told me that they've got, they hurt themselves at work. Or so it's always some kind of a claim now they're filing, pregnancy, workers' comp, something that provides some protections and just made this termination a lot harder. And, and one of the things an attorney once told me was that if you're thinking, if you're even got an employee who's kind of going downhill where somewhere down the road termination might be in the cards, email it to someone. Email HR or email, if it's a manager who's seeing this, the manager emails the CEO or somebody up there, because that puts a date stamp on it. And then if something happens with the timing, you can show, well, we were already talking about it 2 months ago. So this isn't just because they're pregnant or because they went out on a workers' comp leave. We're moving forward with this because the problem continued, but just doing that one email 4 months ahead of time isn't going to save you if you do nothing else in between. If you written up somebody 5 months ago and now want to fire them because of what you wrote up on them, it's like, I'm going to question that. It's like, okay, I think you have to start over because 5 months and you haven't done a thing, it's too much time. You need to start fresh. And always make sure that you're firing people in private setting. Now, sometimes, there's that walk of shame that I hear about so often where now they've left to leave your office or their office or wherever with their box of personal belongings. I actually offer to pack up their stuff and ship it to them, or to meet them out in the parking garage with it. Something like that, so they don't have to do that. That way, like if it's a female, sometimes they'll just go get their purse out of their cube or something and walk away. And then I will come in and pack stuff up, or and tell them I'll either ship it to you or I can bring it to you outside, whatever, is most comfortable. Because it depends on how this is going and what the reason for the termination is. But you want to make it as easy for the employee as you can. But I also don't let them back on their computer. Oh, if you've got some personal stuff on the computer, just let me know what folders they're in and I'll copy it off and send it to you. So you have to kind of walk this tightrope between protecting the company and being kind to the employee. I mean, they're already getting fired. Don't make it even harder. And other things, I've had to have security available close by because we weren't sure just exactly how this employee would take it. You want somebody who knows what they're doing at the interview. I will make a manager. If the manager isn't comfortable doing the meeting, I tell them, I will lead the meeting, but you need to be in the room with me. I don't let them just run out and let me do it on my own. I could, but I don't want them to get away with that. I want them to take some responsibility in the decision and to learn how to do this stuff. And then you have to make sure people know. An email like, oh, Sam isn't working with us anymore here, but Bobby will take over, this job, and Brenda will be doing this part of the work. And they may have questions, but it's not some can answer. But to take a look at that and try and make it as smooth of a process as possible. Sorry, I went over a little bit, and sorry for the microphone issues. Any questions?
Yeah, we do have 5 questions, so if you are able to stay on and listen to the questions, that's great. If you're not able to stay on, we understand, and this webinar has been recorded and will be available later, so you can listen to the questions later if you'd like to, but I'm going to go ahead and ask these 5 questions. What if you have to lay someone off at the same time as you're hiring another employee? How does that look from a timing issue, and is that recommended?
Well, that goes back to what is the reason for the layoff. If you're eliminating the position, then I would just call it elimination of that position, someone over here in a whole different role, not your role. If it's a layoff because of finances, then yeah, that draws a lot of, flags as to why you're able to hire this person over here, but are laying off this one over here, because inevitably it's going to turn out to where, oh, this person over here that you laid off is making too much money and this one's coming in at a lower wage. That's not going to be considered an acceptable answer. So you really need to look at your justifications on both sides and figure out, okay, if it's happening to you, how would you feel? What would you want to know about it?
Okay, and along the same lines, what are your suggestions for timing of notifications and layoff?
In a layoff, unless you're legally required, usually there's not going to be much in the way of notification. The one that I think I was part of that worked best was that we were actually acquired by a company, and it wasn't so much a layoff, it was more like, okay, the acquiring company doesn't need all of us, but we staged it. It's like, okay, for a layoff, and this can happen in a layoff as well as just terminations. It's, we're moving something going on here that's causing the need for a layoff, but maybe it's a stage layoff. What I've done is at the beginning of it, we had all the employees. This is what's going on, and we're making some changes right now. We will be meeting with you individually to talk about where you fit into all this, but know that it's going to be staged over time. So some people will be leaving within the next couple of weeks, some after 6 weeks, and others that will, after 9 months or after 3 months, because that was how it was figured out that we needed those particular kind of people to do whatever needed to be done during those times. If it's going to be one big blast of layoff, I think again, it's just a meeting. Sometimes I've actually done it to where we've separated. The people that are staying go over into this room and someone's talking to them. The people that are going to be laid off go over to this room, not to where you can hear each other, but you separate them out. And then the ones that are being laid off, you're just saying, it's like, I'm sorry, we're having some issues or something, we're changing our direction, reorganizing, whatever the reason is. And all of you are affected by this. We'll be meeting with you individually to talk about how it affects you. There is a meeting going on in the other room for the people who it does not affect, and they're being told that there will be a layoff, but not any more detail about it at this time. Something like that. But you, again, think in terms of being that person getting that message.
Okay. So the next question is from a company that's not in California. As we all know, California laws are vastly different from a lot of other states. If you have an employee that has a family bereavement and wanted more than 3 days off, but since they left, there's been no communication, no response, no calls, don't know when they're coming back, can you fire that person without any recourse?
Well, I won't say without any recourse, but part of it, is I'm going to hold that person, the manager or the HR person responsible for some of that happening. I've started putting in my handbooks a whole clause about during a here's what we expect from you. And, so it's like, and when the person is going out on leave, because, bereavements, you just don't know. I mean, yeah, I had someone who, in a client, they went out on a bereavement leave and then they just disappeared. I mean, we didn't hear from the person ever again. And eventually we fired for job abandonment. And so that would be your termination, is that we tried, but you want to have proof that you've tried to reach them. Did you email them at their home email as opposed to the work email? Did you leave a text message or messages on their phone? You want to show that you've made, a few attempts to try and contact the person. And then if they still aren't responding, yeah, I would say go ahead and terminate for job abandonment, because they haven't tried to respond to anything you've tried.
All right. And in some of your examples, in one of your examples, you were saying that if you have a discussion with the employee, if you use the verbiage, if this doesn't change, you may lose your job, is that considered threatening?
It could be, but it's meant to be, and it's not under the legal threat type of thing of, something, because this is a work-related thing. And you can just, it's like, yeah, it's like, if this doesn't change, your job is at risk. Even with harassment and stuff, there is a clarification with harassment laws that state, if you're talking about the work stuff and you're not just talking to people under protected classifications about what's going wrong with the work, it's not harassment. It's a manager trying to get this person to do their job correctly. So just make sure you understand where it's coming from, that you're wanting to make sure this person understands it.
All right. And when you're having a termination discussion with someone, you mentioned that it's always good to let them know the reason that they're being terminated, because that eliminates a lot of the questions in their mind. But doesn't providing reasons in the termination meeting simply invite argument or debate?
Yes, but my version of that is different than what that person is thinking about, because I've seen those, and my termination meetings in an ideal world are done in 5 minutes. When I talk about having a reason, I'm looking for the most legal, simplest reason I can give as a cause. So if it's like poor performance, I'm going to come in and say, we've had several talks over the last few months about your performance, but we, aren't seeing the improvement we want, and therefore we're going to end the employment relationship. When, and this is like a weird trick that someone taught me a long time ago, but it works so well. It's like when they start getting into that defense mode and offering up reasons why it happened or this or that, I literally will kind of hold up my hand and it's like, no, stop. The decision's been made. Let's just keep moving forward with the paperwork.
Right.
You don't
All
have
right.
to like
And
throw it in their face. Yeah.
One more question came in, so if we have time for that one, that would be great.
Okay.
If you're eliminating a position, do you have to offer the employee any positions that they're qualified for that are open in the organization? And if
I don't know that
you
you're
do,
legally required. Okay. I think what you do. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
if you do offer them the position and it's at a lower rate of pay, is it okay to give them that lower rate of pay?
Okay, so with the elimination, yeah, if you're getting rid of there's a role in the company that just isn't needed anymore because companies change and that happens, then you can just say, it's like, all right, there, excuse me, there are, 2 other openings we're trying to fill right now. If you feel qualified I mean, literally, it's like if you want to apply to either one, I can give you the details about them, because yeah, it's like if they want that position, it's going to be at that accepted pay rate, not at their old pay rate. And so there's 2 things. I think one is you want to make sure it's not just that they think it's automatic they're going to get it. They should have to kind of interview for it, just like an outside person does, and show that they have the skills for that role over there. Because I have found inside a company, people get used to you having that job, and they really don't know what else you're able to do or how those skills can transfer to something else. So that person needs to be able to kind of show that they could do this job. And it helps too, because the manager then doesn't feel like he got stuck with somebody because that position had died over there. Now I'm stuck with this person, even though they don't have the skills I was looking for. So you want to make it a win-win all the way around. If the person can afford to take a lower level, stuff like that, fine, if that's what they want to do. Because some people don't have big ambitions and wanting to keep move up into a company. I've had people actually request to go to a lower position. They hear that's opening, even though their position is still valid, because they just don't want that level of responsibility anymore. But they do need to show that they can do the job. You might be willing to stretch what they can do a little bit more than you would from an outsider because you know the person, but you still want them to feel like they earned it.
Okay. And if someone's not performing and you've been documenting it, is it okay to demote them or reduce their pay before you consider termination?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that then. So we've gone quite a few minutes over. I appreciate everybody staying on the line. Thank you for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. And we will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. And thank you, CJ Westrick, for your time and expertise today. We hope all of the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. And be sure to join us next year for a new webinar series.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a safe day. Bye-bye.